Tasked with escorting a lost bastard prince back to his estate, the handsome knight found his path blocked by bandits. They demanded everything, their gold, and threatened their lives. They realized too late, though, that they had threatened the wrong man. In a blur of steel, the road was cleared. But the knight's life hadn't always been so noble. Some time ago, deep within the abandoned forest, a knight raised his sword against an aged vampire. He claimed the life of the creature and the title of Vampire Slayer, but the victory held a bitter secret. Before delivering the final blow, the knight spitefully revealed that the vampire's peaceful life in the forest had been a calculated trap. The vampire felt a surge of intense annoyance at this revelation. In a desperate act of retaliation, he leaped and dashed toward the knight, yet he stood no chance against such unrighteousness. The knight dealt a final slash, cutting the vampire into multiple pieces and killing him instantly. Eugene woke up breathing heavily, his mind racing with confusion. He wondered what had happened, marveling at the fact that he was intact after being split in half. He questioned if the experience had been a mere dream, but he quickly recognized the tent around him. It was the same one he had lived in 6 months prior, before the Holy Knights began their chase. He realized he had regressed half a year into the past, returning to a time before the subjugation squad started their hunt. Eugene told himself that if this was a second chance, he intended to make it count. He traveled to a remote forest near Broadwind village, a place where humans rarely ventured. He reflected on how he had previously survived there by hiding, a frail vampire holding his breath and barely getting by each day. For 12 years, he had survived on the blood of beasts out of fear, but he decided that hiding would only lead to the same tragic ending. Arriving at a swamp, Eugene acknowledged that a vampire could absorb power through blood, and that stronger prey yielded greater strength. A massive crocodile, the monster of the forest known as a roamer, emerged from the water. Eugene decided to attack the beast to drink its blood and power up. The monster struck, forcing Eugene to dash and fall to the ground. He recognized that the roamer was far above his current rank, and his body could do little more than avoid the attacks. He told himself that if he could land even a single wound, he could taste its blood. Eugene struck the crocodile with his weapon, but the skin was too resilient, and his sword shattered. The roamer's tail flung him away, sending him bleeding to the ground. He glared at the approaching predator, wondering if he had underestimated the strength of these wild creatures. He knew that roamers often carried mana crystals, which were more precious than gemstones and crucial for their strength. If he could obtain one, the situation might change, but the difference in power felt overwhelming. The roamer plunged him into the depths of the water, its jaws clamping around his head. In that moment, Eugene feared his second chance was over, yet his will to survive sparked a new idea. As he was lunged into the mouth of the roamer, he bit the creature's tongue fiercely. The roamer screamed in pain. Eugene realized he had to do anything to live. Suddenly, symbols on his body began to glow, and his frame enlarged as he gained strength from the roamer's blood. Feeling a surge of power, he pulled himself deeper into the creature's maw, where he saw a crystal embedded. He stretched his hand to seize it, driven by the necessity of survival, and bit into the diamond-like crystal. This act ended the life of the roamer instantly. Eugene jumped out of the stream, breathing the fresh air. He reminded himself of his promise to no longer run. Standing by the water, he decided that he would seize both blood and victory, ensuring that everything would change for him in this lifetime. Eugene stood by the water, appearing nearly unrecognizable. He reflected on his initial goal of simply consuming enough blood to become the master of the forest, yet he had absorbed the roamer's mana crystal as well. The power contained within that crystal was beyond his imagination. While he had gained significant power, he sensed it was still not enough to defeat the Holy Knight who had ended his life in the previous timeline. As the sun began to rise, Eugene noted it was still too early to test the full extent of the mana crystal's power. He decided to head back, but a sudden, unfamiliar chuckling from the shadows stopped him. A voice called out, mocking the fake master who had usurped its territory. A small creature appeared, introducing itself as Murim, a water spirit and the true guardian of the lake. Murim expressed gratitude that the fake monster had died in such a pathetic way, but insisted that Eugene must pay for staining the grounds with blood. The spirit began to weave a dramatic curse, threatening that Eugene would be ripped to pieces, then mockingly asked the bald vampire if he had heard. Murim believed that sensing spirits was a rare skill, but was shocked when Eugene directly asked who the spirit was. When Murim questioned how Eugene could see a spirit, Eugene repeated his question and confirmed that he could indeed see the guardian. He then pointed out that Murim had called him a bald vampire, which caused the spirit to fall silent in embarrassment. Murim explained that as a water spirit, the lake had originally been spirit territory until the crocodile took it 15 years ago. Murim had survived by acting as a strategic partner, purifying the water to lure in prey for the beast. The spirit noted that thanks to Eugene, the place was finally purified. Murim added that a bald old man had been seen being eaten by the crocodile earlier, and wondered if that had been a meticulous disguise Eugene used to lower the creature's guard. As Murim spoke, Eugene noticed one of the tattoos on his shoulder was disappearing. He felt deeply confused by this. He remembered being born a vampire with 10 tattoos on his body, though his early memories were gone. He had always lived a quiet life, without reflecting on whether the tattoos were marks or spells. He deduced that one had been released because of the recent events. Eugene informed Murim that he was leaving, and told the spirit to protect the forest well. Murim was shocked and complained about his sudden departure, mentioning how lonely it had been as fewer beings gained the ability to see spirits over time. Murim asked if Eugene wanted to help turn the swamp back into a lake, and offered clean water to Eugene as a reward. To Eugene's disgust, the spirit bludged water out of its mouth and asked him to drink it. Eugene told the spirit to get lost and walked away, even as Murim followed, offering to produce more water through other bodily functions, clearly missing the reason for Eugene's revulsion. Several days later, in Broadwind village, a resident ran to the village chief, screaming that the red-eyed monster had appeared. They found a large pile of dead animals left as a gift. The villager wondered what the monster was thinking, noting that these gifts usually came only once every fortnight. The chief acknowledged that the monster, Eugene, had lived at the foot of the mountain for 10 years without being a threat. Eugene stepped forward, prompting the elder to admit to himself that he never knew what the creature was thinking. Despite their caution, the villagers had developed a strange relationship with Eugene. Since he paid his taxes in meat, they no longer feared him. The elder greeted Eugene, noting it had been a long time. Eugene explained that after a long period of isolation, he had been healed of his sickness and wanted to share the good news. He stated that because he had received help from the village, he wanted to return the favor and told them to call him if they ever needed help. When Eugene revealed his face, the villagers were blinded by his beauty. They whispered among themselves, wondering if the red-eyed monster was actually a half-elf or a noble. They were shocked that the person behind the mask was so good-looking. Later, Murim asked Eugene why he gave away all his kills, suggesting that a vampire should want blood and massacre. Murim questioned if he intended to be buddy-buddy with them instead of eating them, noting that Eugene had planned to leave in a few days anyway. Eugene stopped Murim and revealed to him that very soon, mercenaries would raid the village and kill everyone. Eugene knew that if he didn't stop this incident, the future where the holy knights swarmed his home would come true. Murim found the claim hard to believe. Eugene told the spirit that the truth would be revealed soon enough, and emphasized the need to appear harmless to gain the villagers' trust. Murim asked what the mercenaries and gaining trust had to do with each other. Suddenly, Eugene stopped walking, causing Murim to bump into him. Murim began to complain, but then saw a group of men approaching. The men stared at Eugene, wondering about his strange hair. One suggested Eugene was a villager, and noted he was very pretty for a man. They observed he was alone, and lacked a proper weapon, and decided they must kill him before he could scream and ruin their ambush. As one man dashed forward with an axe, Eugene braced himself. The man swung, but Eugene swiftly used his hand to slice the man's head off in an instant. As the body fell limp, the other mercenaries stood frozen in shock. Eugene calmly told Murim to think about the situation, reiterating that he needed the villagers' trust so he would not look suspicious. As his eyes began to glow red and black, he declared that he was going to kill all the mercenaries right then and there. Before the mercenaries could register the massacre, Eugene had already laid waste to most of them. His movements were a blur, far more agile and faster than any human could follow. He tore through their necks like paper, making quick work of them under the cover of night. Their attacks were too slow to land, leaving them no chance of survival. Amidst the carnage, one survivor screamed in despair, demanding to know how Eugene had killed so many so fast. The man realized retreat was impossible, for to turn back was to invite instant death. In a desperate plea, he mentioned they were merely trying to get their job done. Eugene gazed at him, claiming he was the owner of the village and demanding to know the nature of their task. The man apologized, claiming he had not known the village belonged to Eugene's kind, and clarified that they were not there to hunt vampires. He explained that a bastard son of the Tirwin family was hiding in the village, having hidden his identity after everyone assumed he had gone missing. Eugene countered that the man was a proficient liar, noting that such a large force was unnecessary for a simple kidnapping. He asked if the real plan was to erase the entire village. The mercenary admitted that while Eugene was not completely wrong, they were not hired by the Tirwin patriarch. He revealed their clients were actually Kamara Tirwin and Verthel Tirwin, suggesting the job stemmed from political friction among the nobles. He insisted they were just there for Fellid, and that the large number of men was simply to ensure they all made a living. Eugene recognized the name Verthel Tirwin as the commander of the vampire hunter squad, the very man whose knights, including young Dirt, had ended his life previously. He reasoned that, while a knight like Verthel might not have ordered a village massacre, the mercenaries had likely decided on that course themselves. It was this very massacre in his past life that had drawn the attention of the paladins and led to his death. The dying mercenary continued to sob, lamenting that he had seen this as a good opportunity and would never have come if he had known Eugene was there. Eugene turned away, telling the man to watch out for wolves on the way back. Surprised and grateful, the man asked if he was truly being shown mercy and allowed to live. Before he could finish his thanks, Eugene bent over, snatched an object from the ground, and hurled it with such force that it severed the man's head instantly. Murim appeared, asking why he had killed the man so abruptly. Eugene, clearly annoyed, said that since the man knew he was a vampire, he could not let him live. Besides, he noted that the wolves had already arrived. When the villagers eventually arrived to witness the aftermath, the chief was horrified, asking if this was Eugene's doing. Eugene denied it, claiming he had found the bodies while checking his traps on the way back from a hunt. He suggested the men had been ambushed on their way to Broadwind village and pointed toward the culprits. When the villagers brought their torches closer, they saw the bodies of black wolves scattered among the men. Eugene explained that since there were so many wolves, he had gone after them while they were distracted eating the corpses. He warned that while some were dead, many more had escaped and might be watching from the shadows. The old man noted that black wolves were a local nuisance, but expressed surprise that Eugene had killed so many alone. Upon inspection, the villagers found wolf claw marks on the corpses and the surrounding trees, confirming Eugene's story. Though the chief apologized for his doubt, Eugene simply shrugged it off and asked what they intended to do with the bodies. Murim was shocked by Eugene's constant lying. He had killed the wolves that appeared after the mercenaries were dead, and used their teeth to fake the bite marks. Murim realized that while covering the crime was smart, Eugene seemed strangely obsessed with his image among the villagers. The guardian spirit concluded that Eugene clearly had a larger plan in motion, and decided to watch from the sidelines. Eugene then informed the chief that he had searched the corpses for items to return to the families and had found a letter. He handed it to the elderly man, who recognized the Lord's seal of Sir Tirwin. In shock, the chief called for a boy named Fellid. The villagers were confused, but the chief explained that Fellid, who had come to the village 8 years ago, might actually be Sir Tirwin's bastard son. The revelation that the boy was a noble left the crowd stunned. The chief fretted over what to do now that the mercenaries sent for the boy were dead. Eugene mentioned that while the mercenaries had not survived the beasts, he could escort Fellid to the city himself, given his long experience in the woods. The chief was hesitant to ask for such a favor, but Eugene smiled and said it was fine, remarking that a knight would never decline a chance to help. Murim was floored by the audacity, thinking that Eugene had skin made of steel for such a blatant lie. The villagers were equally shocked, pointing at Eugene in surprise as they realized he was claiming to be a knight. Smirking at their reaction, Eugene apologized for the late introduction, and introduced himself as Eugene of the Eugene House. While Murim stood back in disbelief at the bold fabrication, Eugene focused on the next phase of his plan. Morning arrived quickly, and preparations for the journey to the estate were complete. The village elder handed the letter to Eugene, just as Fellid arrived to begin the trek. After the villagers shared their farewells and best wishes, the group set off from the village. While traveling, they were intercepted by a group of bandits blocking their path. Although there was immediate friction and a brief confrontation at the onset, Eugene made quick work of the attackers. With the threat neutralized, their journey proceeded smoothly from that point onward. Upon arrival at the estate, the city bustle was at its peak. Murim flew about, visibly excited by the vibrant surroundings, while Fellid cautioned young Eugene to be wary of the crowds. Fellid mentioned his past visits with the village chief, and warned that merchants were notorious for exploitation, often leaving the chief completely flustered and easily ripped off. Eugene considered that having money was a prerequisite for worry, so he asked Fellid to wait while he approached a merchant. He dropped a collection of wolfskins onto a table and asked the shopkeeper for a fair price. The man was immediately struck by the rarity and quantity of the black wolf leather. Judging Eugene by his shabby clothes, the merchant pegged him as a wanderer and decided he was easy to pick on. He claimed the leather was damaged and offered a mere 18 silver coins. Eugene glared at him with such vicious intensity that the man was mortified. Terrified by Eugene's piercing red eyes, the merchant looked away and stammered that since black wolf leather was rare, he could offer a bit more. He pleaded for Eugene to use words instead of such an intimidating stare. Flustered, he raised the offer to 23 coins, then 25, then 27 and 28. Finally, reaching his limit out of sheer terror, the merchant offered 30 silver coins, stating he could go no higher. Eugene accepted the deal. Reflecting on the exchange, Eugene thought the skins did look somewhat worn, but the money was sufficient. Since he had lived in the forest for so long, he was still struggling to read properly. While he had learned the basics from Fellid, he remained far from proficient. Murim appeared and complimented Eugene's new silk robe, remarking that while vampires usually preferred grander attire, the quality was worth the cost. Eugene replied that despite his initial worries, the market had proven generous. Murim teased him for his simple tastes, suggesting that a vampire should live a luxurious life in a castle, drinking blood like wine and commanding servants. The spirit insisted that to rise in the world, one must burn with ambition. Eugene pointed out that for a spirit who claimed to only know swamps, Murim was surprisingly knowledgeable. Murim explained that in the spirit realm, seniors who had succeeded in the human world shared wisdom about living long lives and studying imperial languages. When Eugene asked if Murim could actually read, the spirit admitted to being illiterate, capable only of producing water. Fellid approached, asking who Eugene had been talking to. Eugene claimed he was merely speaking to himself and asked about the boy's well-being. Fellid apologized for his earlier sickness, explaining that preparing a rabbit had triggered a memory of the morning's corpses, causing him to vomit. Eugene reassured him that ordinary people were rarely accustomed to such sights. To make amends, Fellid offered to continue their lessons, noting they had plenty of paper and a long night ahead. As they practiced, Eugene was surprised by the ease of learning letters. Fellid praised him, mentioning that while he was a quick learner, most people took months or even a year to master writing. Eugene remained focused, concerned for Fellid that his current proficiency might not be enough for a child suddenly joining nobility. Fellid admitted his mother never shared details about Sir Tirwin, and that he did not expect a warm welcome. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a group of men. Eugene went on guard immediately, recognizing by their armor and disciplined formation that these were professional mercenaries, unlike the drifters they had encountered before. Their leader, Captain Partek, asked where they were headed. To avoid suspicion, Eugene stated they were going to Sir Tirwin's castle. Partek mentioned they were headed the same way, and offered to share their camp and supplies. A young mercenary named Raban interrupted, questioning the hospitality, but Partek silenced him. Partek introduced himself and apologized for the rookie's rudeness. When Eugene introduced himself as a knight, Jan Eugene of the Eugene House, Raban laughed and mocked his lack of a horse or armor. He even went as far as getting into Eugene's space and poking his chest, asking him to say the truth about his actual status, because no one could believe the lies he spouted. In that moment, the young lad had no idea that he was about to lose his head. Partek, sensing the danger, punched Raban in the face, to keep him from escalating the situation. Eugene accepted the apology and allowed them to settle nearby, though he realized he needed to become a real knight quickly to avoid future suspicion. Nearby, Partek scolded a recovering Raban for his stupidity. He pointed out that Eugene wore a high-grade robe worth more than Raban's monthly pay and possessed the disciplined center of gravity of a professional killer. Partek explained that knights were professional killers born into distinguished families, and anyone bold enough to impersonate one was either real or extremely dangerous. He noted that they were likely all heading to the same newly discovered dungeon in the Tirwin territory. Eugene, using his sharp hearing, listened to their conversation, He wondered why the Tirwin family had previously hired trash mercenaries when professionals like Partek's group were available. He decided to approach them, pulling back his hood and revealing a face so handsome it stunned the mercenaries. He suggested they travel together to the Verthel Tirwin territory, hoping to gather information. It was the next day, and they had arrived at the estate. Murim later shared eavesdrop secrets with Eugene. The spirit mentioned that Sir Tirwin's health was failing. He stated that a new dungeon was discovered in their estate, and that the family lacked the money or troops to explore the new dungeon. Murim worried that Fellid might become an orphan or be killed by his brothers. Eugene gazed at Fellid, realizing that Sir Tirwin likely summoned the boy to see him one last time. He knew their fates were about to change. They finally reached the Rose Castle, Sir Tirwin's seat. As they were halted at the gates, Tirwin, the eldest son, approached. He ordered the mercenaries to begin unloading goods. When he questioned Eugene's presence, Eugene introduced himself as John Eugene, a knight. Before he could introduce Fellid, another man arrived. The voice was unmistakable. Eugene recognized it as the man who had first discovered him in his previous life, the commander of the vampire hunting unit who had tormented him alongside young Dirt. The man standing before them was Knight Verthel Tirwin. Verthel Tirwin stared at them and asked his brother, Kamara, what he was doing at the gates, to which Kamara responded by asking if he was now required to report his every movement to Verthel, as though Verthel was currently the lord of the house. But Verthel replied, saying he didn't mean it that way. But before the bickering could escalate, Eugene intervened. He announced that he carried a letter from the representative of Broadwind. Verthel reached out to snatch the missive, but Eugene pulled back sharply, refusing to let him take it. Instead, he pointedly handed the letter to the elder brother, Kamara, while casting an annoyed glare at Verthel. Kamara read the contents and remarked with surprise that the mercenaries had been ambushed by wolves and wiped out. He turned his gaze toward Fellid, identifying him as the bastardized son. Fellid bowed respectfully, and Kamara acknowledged him as their new brother, mentioning that their father was eager for the meeting. Verthel exhaled a heavy, frustrated breath and ordered servants to take the boy away to be washed and dressed in proper clothing. As they dragged Fellid away, Eugene stood his ground with Kamara, insisting that he wanted to discuss his reward and meet Sir Tirwin first. Verthel glared at him, stating flatly that such a meeting would not be allowed. When Eugene asked if he could see him for even a moment, Verthel clarified that their father was currently unwell, and that the reward would be paid in gold coins before Eugene was expected to leave. Eugene noted that he had worked quite hard to deliver their brother, prompting Kamara to side with him, asking why the man who brought Fellid home shouldn't be allowed a brief audience. Verthel snapped that their father could not stay awake for even an hour, and that a random stranger should not waste that time. Kamara accused Verthel of trying to control their father's entire schedule, leading Verthel to claim his words were being twisted. Eventually, Kamara gave up the argument, mockingly apologizing to Sir Eugene and blaming the delay on his brother's desire to play the role of the heir. He then turned his back to escort Fellid inside. Eugene felt a surge of annoyance, realizing Kamara had never intended to let him see the Lord from the very beginning. Suddenly, a new voice bellowed for the second son of Tirwin. A man arrived with 3 corpses slung over his shoulder, dropping them unceremoniously to the ground. He identified them as mercenaries who had been stealing from villagers instead of training, and suggested killing one as a public example. Verthel noticed Eugene watching, and quickly ushered the newcomer inside to talk where fewer people could listen. Captain Partek identified the newcomer as Sir Galfredic, a knight with a brilliant future who had recently placed third in a major tournament hosted by the Evergrow family. Partek described Galfredic as a man of monstrous strength who had bested 1,000 competitors, and surmised he was using the Tirwin dungeon as a stepping stone to be hired by a more powerful family. Eugene realized the gravity of the competition, and asked Partek if he would take him on as a client now that his current job was finished. In the evening, while Verthel and Galfredic were busy punishing the remaining mercenaries, Kamara watched the spectacle with growing concern. He felt the desperate need to open the dungeon himself, noting how openly his younger brother had been pursuing success since their father's health declined. Kamara reflected on how Verthel had used his connections to bring a powerhouse like Sir Galfredic to the estate. If they succeeded, all the glory would go to his brother. He wondered how he could possibly compete without hiring random, unreliable people. His thoughts were interrupted by a maid, announcing that Eugene requested an audience. Kamara welcomed Eugene warmly, assuring him Fellid was safe, and promising a reward once their father woke. They sat down, and Kamara expressed his gratitude for the letter Eugene had given him earlier, admitting It had improved his mood. Eugene clarified that his business was with the lord of the estate, and that he had been taken aback by the earlier intervention. When Kamara asked what he truly wanted, perhaps an identity certification from the lord, Eugene offered a different proposal. He wanted to be included in the dungeon raid. Kamara burst into laughter, finding Eugene far more interesting than expected. He looked at Eugene's shabby clothes contrasted with the expensive robe, and questioned why a wandering knight who had only fought a few robbers should be allowed to join. Eugene argued that the offer would do Kamara no harm. He explained that for his reward he would take only 100 silver coins and half the loot, excluding the mana stones. Kamara found the low price suspicious, but Eugene looked at him shabbily and noted that it was Kamara, not himself, who was currently in a corner. Kamara felt a sting of anger, but recognized that Eugene knew which cards to play. He deduced that Eugene was a knight who valued honor over greed, and saw him as a useful tool against his brother. Kamara accepted the deal and shook Eugene's hand. Eugene recalled Partek's earlier advice that mana crystals were too expensive for a lone knight to purify, whereas byproducts could be sold for full value immediately. By following this strategy, Eugene had forced Kamara's hand. The scene shifted to a meeting between Verthel and Galfredic. Verthel complained about adding a new member to the party at the last minute. Galfredic was firm, stating the dungeon was a place of life and death, and that he would not tolerate a half-baked amateur hindering their advance. Though, as Verthel walked up to him, he admitted that he had no expectations for anyone his brother recruited. Kamara then entered the room and introduced the newest addition to the party, Knight Yan Eugene and his mercenary band. Verthel smirked, stating they could not accept someone of unknown origin and skill. Kamara vouched for Eugene's prowess, mentioning how he had single-handedly dealt with a group of bandits that had been a headache for the territory. To test this claim, Galfredic suddenly threw a short blade at Eugene. The moment Eugene sensed the attack, he drew his sword and struck the blade away, sending it flying into a nearby wall. Galfredic rose with a smirk, noting Eugene's unscarred skin and lack of sunburn, and challenged the young master to a spar to prove his worth. Outside in the training arena, a crowd gathered, chanting Galfredic's name. Many felt sorry for Eugene, expecting him to be crushed by Galfredic's legendary strength. Galfredic appeared confident, striking his sword into the ground in a formal knight's greeting. Eugene, slightly confused but wanting to save face, mimicked the gesture exactly. The bell rang, and the two dashed at each other, their swords clashing with a tight, fierce energy. After a brief release, Galfredic motioned for Eugene to keep coming. Even as Raban cheered for Eugene, Partek corrected him, noting that Galfredic was merely sizing up his opponent and allowing himself to be pushed back. Galfredic analyzed Eugene's style, finding it crude and unpolished, yet possessing the unpredictable vibe of someone raised in the wild. He declared that Eugene's claim of being a knight was a lie, citing his ruthless swordsmanship and sloppy stance. He asserted that Eugene relied entirely on physical ability rather than training. Eugene remained unbothered, telling Galfredic he talked too much. Galfredic promised to shut up if Eugene could win. He then forced Eugene's sword down, and twirled for a strike that sent Eugene flying into a wall. Verthel's excitement rose clearly, but Eugene emerged from the dust, refusing to give up. He dashed forward, and the spar continued with even greater intensity. Their swords eventually clashed and shattered simultaneously. Without hesitation, the two began a fistfight. Galfredic was shocked by the strength coming from Eugene's smaller build. Although Galfredic felt superior in experience, Eugene's survival instincts and rapid learning ability were terrifying. As Galfredic prepared to punch a vulnerable Eugene struck the ground with his hand, pivoted his entire body, and pulled Galfredic off balance. Galfredic realized he had lost control of the stance. Eugene delivered a swift, powerful punch to Galfredic's face, caving in the wall behind him. Just then, the mediator announced Yan Eugene as the victor. The crowd erupted, stunned by the unknown knight's strength. Raban boasted to the spectators, while Partek looked on in disgust at the boy's sudden pride. Galfredic quickly woke up and, instead of attacking, grabbed Eugene's hand and led the crowd in a chant of Jan Eugene's name. The victory completely shifted how the estate viewed Eugene, and as you'd expect, Verthel wasn't so happy. The table was set the next day. At breakfast, servants swarmed Eugene, claiming they were ordered by Kamara to see to his every need. Obviously he was a vampire, so this delicious meal in front of him that is making us salivate would only make someone like him vomit, essentially. While people were beginning to let go of their suspicion, Eugene found the attention uncomfortable. Eugene told them to tell Kamara he preferred to be alone. Later that day, Kamara sarcastically greeted him in the corridor, calling him a capable knight. He mentioned that Eugene had refused all the gifts sent to his room. Raban appeared, now acting as a humble servant. Galfredic pushed past everyone to grab Eugene's shoulder, calling him a friend and comrade in arms. Eugene told him not to cling so much, while Galfredic complained that his face was still throbbing from the punch, making Eugene to suggest if Galfredic wanted to be hit again. Suddenly, as Eugene was engulfed in this new crowd of people, a voice cut through the scene, prompting them to turn their attention as Fellid walked into the scene, asking Eugene. In a darker part of the castle, a man screamed for mercy while being struck repeatedly. Verthel was venting his rage, blaming the subordinate for failing to kill Fellid in the village. He noted that if the job had been done, the red-eyed knight would never have come to Rose Castle, and his plans wouldn't have been derailed. He mocked the man for hiring mercenaries who were wiped out by wolves and threatened to gouge out his eyes. Well, he did, but don't tell YouTube. Finally, Verthel decided he would use the dungeon to dispose of Fellid's corpse cleanly. In their private room, Eugene warned Fellid that Verthel's plan to send him into the dungeon was a death sentence. He explained that the earlier mercenaries were likely sent by one of his brothers to ensure he never reached the castle. Eugene offered Fellid a choice: become his servant. He reminded the boy that at 16, he was free to choose his own path. He urged Fellid to struggle for his life, rather than wait for his brothers to kill him. On the day of the raid, the group gathered at the dungeon gates. Galfredic debriefed the men, explaining that since the dungeon was new, they should expect low-rank monsters like goblins or mid-ranks like trolls. He ordered them to clear a path but retreat if a high-rank monster appeared. Nearby, common workers plotted to stay back and avoid the dangerous vanguard. Verthel arrived, looking for Fellid. The men were flustered and seemed unaware of who Fellid was, but then, a worker pointed to the front, where Fellid was handing Eugene food and wishing him a safe return. Verthel watched them, his face twisted in anger. Verthel screamed for Fellid as he marched toward the boy, accusing him of dawdling and demanding to know if he had already forgotten his instructions. He ordered Fellid to hurry, shoulder his pack, and wait in his assigned position immediately. When Fellid paid him no attention, Verthel's irritation peaked. He called the boy a little brat and asked if he had gone deaf, reaching out to grab him. As he pulled at Fellid, repeating that he had clearly told him to return to his post, Eugene suddenly intervened. Eugene gripped Verthel's hand, forcing him to release the boy, and warned him never to lay a finger on Fellid again. He declared Verthel's demands ridiculous, questioning if the man had lost his mind by sending a boy whose only experience with a blade involved kitchen knives into a dungeon opening. Verthel yanked his hand away, calling Eugene disrespectful, and claiming he only wished to raise his little brother to be strong. He told Eugene to know his place, glaring at him and asserting that Eugene was in no position to yank the child around like a puppet. Eugene countered that it was Verthel who did not know his place. He revealed that Fellid had become his servant the day before, a fact he noted everyone present could attest to. As the crowd began to glare condescendingly at Verthel, Eugene continued, stating that he and Fellid now shared a bond thicker than blood. He promised that if Verthel so much as touched the child, he would consider it a challenge. Eugene glared viciously, suggesting that if Verthel wanted to loosen up his body before entering the dungeon, he was welcome to try. Verthel, visibly uncomfortable, demanded to know who had given permission for such an arrangement. He argued that taking in another family's bastard child was no easy feat and would likely ruin the boy's future. Around them, the men began to murmur, expressing how reassured they felt about the upcoming raid. They spoke of having leaders with genuine skill rather than mere titles, recalling the incredible duel between Eugene and Sir Galfredic from the previous week. Their laughter and admiration only served to further annoy Verthel, who cursed them in his mind. Kamara appeared then, tapping Verthel on the shoulder and smirking. He mentioned that he also saw no problem with entrusting their brother to Sir Eugene. He pointed out that since Fellid was 16 and had passed his coming-of-age ceremony, the boy was an adult who should choose his own path. Verthel's fury reached a breaking point. Fellid had understood the survival of the weak. If one cannot be strong, one must form a pact. Kamara walked toward Fellid, offering to show him his studies, and asking if the boy was able to read. Amidst this, a scout approached Sir Galfredic, reporting that there were no traces of roamers nearby, and no signs of monsters escaping through a dungeon burrow. The scout asked if they might proceed with the opening. Galfredic gave the order to begin. The dungeon doors were heaved wide, and the gathered force stared into the dark entrance. Galfredic turned to the men, reminding them that their lives were in their own hands. As the men smirked with anticipation, he ordered the advance. The company marched into the dungeon simultaneously. Standing behind them, Kamara and Fellid waved, wishing them well as the doors shut and sealed, leaving the party to the unknown with the hope that God would watch over them. Screams erupted from every corner of the dungeon as a herd of goblins ambushed the party. The men were utterly unprepared for the impact, and even Sir Galfredic, despite his desperate efforts to strike down the creatures and protect his people, struggled under the weight of the distress. He shouted for his men to return to their positions, ordering the archers to fall into the center and defend the ceilings. Everywhere turned to a bloodied mess as goblins swarmed from every shadow. Despair took hold of the survivors, and when one man attempted to flee, Galfredic bodily hauled him back, shouting that they were only safe if they remained together. Galfredic became worried. His internal thoughts were heavy with doubt regarding the mercenaries he had gathered in such a hurry, and he wondered how he could possibly subjugate a dungeon with such poor members. When scouts appeared and warned of goblins closing in from all directions, Eugene suddenly dashed past Galfredic. Shocked, Galfredic shouted that going alone was suicide, but Eugene paid him no mind as he vanished into the dark. Moments later, Eugene's mask flew out of the gloom. Galfredic rushed in, expecting to find a gruesome scene, but Eugene stood there completely unscathed. He mentioned casually that he had killed every monster at the crossroads and presented a valuable item found in the corner. Galfredic stared, struck by the irony of Eugene looking so dazzling amidst such gore. Later, as the raid paused to gather loot and attend to the dead and injured, Eugene sat far at the opposite corner. When some men approached him with the mana crystals they had looted in the hunt, Eugene examined the small cloth of mana crystals. He was surprised by the quantity, noting their color and size. Murim remarked that the size was disappointing compared to higher quality stones, explaining that a crystal size was proportionate to the monster's strength. Eugene was disappointed, wondering if it was only wild roamers that possessed larger crystals, though Murim explained that while monsters became roamers upon leaving a dungeon, it didn't guarantee an increase in crystal size, though the roamer Eugene had previously absorbed was a rare, powerful exception. Eugene realized how fortunate he was to have obtained that red crystal. When Murim questioned if the dungeon held any truly high-level monsters, a loud growl echoed from the depths. Galfredic signaled that break time was over, ordering his tired men back into formation. He told the men that he and Eugene would take the front, threatening punishment for anyone who fled. He mentioned privately to Eugene that the mercenaries were useless, and that the upcoming monsters would be on a different level entirely. He warned that intermediate monsters were likely using the goblins as soldiers, and the high-level lords would be waiting in the core depths. Eugene reflected on the useful ability he had gained from the swamp roamer, wondering if consuming another would grant him something new. Eugene then took note of the footsteps approaching and informed Galfredic of them, stating that 3 of them were much heavier. Shocked by Eugene's keen hearing, Galfredic handed him a spear, encouraging him to throw it into the upcoming beasts. Eugene lunged back and thrusted it into the darkness, piercing a large goblin instantly. Galfredic screamed for the charge, and the second wave began. While Galfredic coordinated the men, Eugene laid waste to the front lines. He leaped onto a large goblin, slashing its eyes and cutting the fingers of the large beast before stabbing it through the head. He licked the blood from his face in amusement, a sight that engraved itself into the memories of the men as the style of a bloody beast. Eugene then dug his fingers into the skull, detaching the head and spinal cord in one motion. Silence fell, proving once more the absolute gap in Eugene's power. Some time had passed, and the second wave of the battle left the space chill and calm, but the men were paralyzed by mental exhaustion from what they had witnessed. Galfredic, realizing they could not push further, suggested a withdrawal. Eugene stated he wasn't tired, and suggested Galfredic take the party back while he and his own mercenaries proceeded alone. Galfredic admired this as an act of consideration for the soldiers' fatigue. As they ventured deeper, Raban felt a surge of terror, wondering why he was being swept up in such a scary situation. He stepped on a spider, and suddenly, cave-grit spiders began gliding from the ceiling. These group-hunting monsters melted prey with acidic poison. Partek suggested falling back due to their numbers, but Eugene dashed forward, stating the numbers were nothing. Driven by his words, Raban and Partek found the resolve to push forward and defend themselves, but they were eventually outnumbered. Eugene protected Raban, laying waste to the swarm. A brief silence settled over the area, only to be broken by the sight of Partek trembling. As they followed his gaze upward, the boss Spider-Lord finally revealed itself. When a ginormous Spider-Lord appeared, Raban screamed for a retreat, claiming they needed Galfredic's help against such a high-ranked beast. Eugene ordered his men to withdraw, declaring the spider his prey. Murim noted that this lord was likely stronger than the master of the swamp. Eugene, glad for the challenge, compared the fight to the excitement of opening a difficult treasure chest. Following the fearsome battle, Eugene gained a camouflage ability. By combining this with his skin reinforcement, he found he could finally stand under the sun. When he appeared without his mask, the local women were stunned by his beauty, whispering that he must have elven blood. Galfredic joined the banter, yelling that Eugene's sharp eyes and ears made sense if he was part elf. Eugene accepted this sentiment and decided to use the excuse of an elven ancestor to avoid suspicion in the near future. However, as Eugene sat there, he noted that the mana crystal had also triggered unfamiliar memories of a soft hand and a ringing bell. He wondered if these were his own past. He found Galfredic playfully choking Raban, but his focus remained on his name, Eugene, the only thing he truly remembered. He felt a hunch that erasing these marks one by one would reveal who he truly was. Later that day they met with the dying Sir Tirwin. Galfredic introduced himself as the third son of the House of Crema, while Eugene introduced himself as the eldest son of House Eugene. Sir Tirwin provided a certificate to guarantee Eugene's identity, to which Eugene expressed gratitude, but suddenly, he began to cough in his sickbed. As he coughed, Kamara watched him with worry. Sir Tirwin's last words to Kamara were that a lord must look after his people, not his land. After he passed, many grieved, though Verthel Tirwin stood outside looking annoyed, clearly having other plans for the estate. Outside, Galfredic prepared to leave, apologizing for departing during the funeral. Kamara understood, and Galfredic invited Eugene to join him, but Eugene preferred to stay and explore the dungeon further. Galfredic mentioned that the Count of Evergrow would have liked Eugene. They shook hands, expressing mutual honor and crossing swords. Fellid, confused by the departure, asked Senior Partek if they were staying. Partek explained they were heading to the trading company to buy a horse for Eugene and sell the monster byproducts. Fellid eagerly offered to assist as the retainer of Eugene, but Eugene viciously told him he wouldn't be needing his assistance, leaving Fellid stunned in confusion. The scene shifted to the docks of Murim, the great commerce city, where a bewildered Fellid stood among the workers. What exactly did Eugene mean when he said Fellid would be working as his retainer? Raban stood before the mountain of dungeon byproducts Eugene had retrieved, declaring to the gathering crowd that a single knight had secured such wealth. He emphasized that every piece belonged to Eugene. The name sparked immediate shock among the onlookers, who whispered in astonishment about the recent dungeon subjugation in the Tirwin territory. Raban barked at the crowd to keep their hands off the goods, clearly enjoying the spectacle of their disbelief. Nearby, Fellid worked to arrange the items while casting a wary glance at a room above, thinking that Eugene was certainly taking his time with the negotiations. Inside that room, Eugene sat across from Billmore of the Palin Trading Company. Billmore boasted that the Pride of Murim would take full responsibility for the byproducts, speaking at length about their services. Eugene reflected that he had initially doubted Partek's recommendation, yet he was impressed that Partek had introduced him to such a large-scale enterprise. He realized that establishing a connection with such a company would be invaluable for someone like himself, who remained largely ignorant of human social networks. The door suddenly slammed open, hitting Billmore in the face. A man stepped inside and demanded to know which of them was Eugene. Eugene and Partek looked on in surprise. Partek leaned in and whispered to Eugene that the situation had become awkward. When Eugene asked for a simpler explanation, Partek clarified that the newcomer was a secretary working for the deputy manager of the Palin Trading Company. He warned that this man held more power than Billmore, and had likely come to seize the byproducts at a lower price. Partek advised Eugene to proceed with extreme caution if he wanted a stable trading partner. Eugene found the idea of being careful distasteful. Billmore attempted to intervene, addressing the man as Sir Grail, and explaining that Eugene was already in negotiations for an exclusive contract. Grail shoved Billmore aside, telling him not to challenge someone he could not beat, and pointed out the lack of signed paperwork. Grail turned to John Eugene, mentioning that the entire harbor was talking about the knight who had decapitated a troll with his bare hands. Internally, Grail dismissed these stories as mere rumors meant to inflate the value of the goods, a tactic he attributed to a transparent newbie. However, he maintained his professional veneer, stating that the deputy manager wished to sign John Eugene personally. He urged John Eugene to leave the shabby room and follow him. John Eugene fixed Grail with a glare so intense it seemed to carry the weight of divine wrath. Terrified by the sudden pressure, Grail instinctively bowed and apologized for his rudeness. He reintroduced himself as the secretary to the deputy manager and insisted this was a grand opportunity for John Eugene to sell his goods under better terms. John Eugene questioned what kind of opportunity that could possibly be, repeating the man's words with cold derision. Grail, now visibly shaking, stammered another apology and screamed that he would return another day before fleeing the room. The onlookers were left in a state of confusion. John Eugene turned to Partek and asked what he had done wrong. Partek admitted he had no idea. Billmore, however, began to weep with gratitude, claiming he was moved to tears that John Eugene had rejected the deputy manager on his account. He promised his unwavering support, offering anything John Eugene might need. John Eugene admitted he liked the sound of that, but when Billmore asked when they should begin proceedings, John Eugene simply told him they were starting immediately and ordered everyone out. At the deputy manager's office, Grail bowed low before Percella, admitting he had no excuse for his failure. He reported that the knight was no ordinary man. Percella told him to raise his head, noting that knights often made things difficult for merchants out of pride. She smiled, suggesting that merchants must simply respond in their own way, using the power of money and goods. She observed that it was not difficult to manipulate a poor knight who lacked even a proper horse. She instructed Grail to deliver a gift to John Eugene, a gift far too exquisite for a penniless knight to refuse. Later, Fellid reacted with shock when John Eugene instructed him to stay behind and continue selling the monster byproducts to Billmore. Fellid questioned if his skills were too lacking to follow his master, promising to begin sword training immediately. John Eugene explained that a retainer's role was to support their knight in both battle and daily life. He clarified that Fellid's current mission was to manage the finances and learn the ways of business from Billmore. Though saddened, Fellid realized that without John Eugene, he would have died long ago. He told himself that throwing a tantrum would be disgraceful. But then, John Eugene promised that once they had saved enough funds, he would teach Fellid the sword so he could support him in battle as well. Fellid smiled, placed a hand on his chest, and vowed to follow his orders. John Eugene, Partek, and Murim later walked through the markets. John Eugene remarked on how quickly money vanished, even when buying only essentials. Murim, clutching a thin purse, admitted her heart felt hollow and hoped they could recover their funds soon. Then, John Eugene stopped to stare at a set of plate armor. Partek described it as a dream for every knight, explaining its immense value and how it was often passed down through generations. Their conversation was interrupted by Raban, who came running with news of a massive roamer threat outside Marin. He reported that monsters from the eastern forest were pushing toward the city, and the local guilds were struggling to hold them back. Raban suggested they participate in the subjugation. When John Eugene asked why, Raban explained that unlike dungeons, these hunts had no commission fees. Marin was a city of capital where they could sell loot at high prices, with no transport costs. John Eugene immediately agreed to go. Before they could depart, Grail arrived, breathless, delivering a warhorse as a gift from the deputy manager. Grail insisted it was merely a token of appreciation. Eugene leapt onto the horse, told Grail to convey his thanks, and rode off with Murim. They left Partek and Raban behind, who quickly scrambled to follow their leader. In the eastern forest, goblins were feasting on remains when John Eugene charged in on horseback, swiftly decapitating them as he passed. Murim noted that the scale of the incursion was massive and suggested the guild members ahead might already be dead. John Eugene remarked that this was good news, as he had no desire to share the loot. He eventually reached a clearing where a herd of goblins attacked the men defending the city. A man named Madrika was surrounded by giant goblins, screaming his defiance even as his horse fled. Just as the goblins moved to strike, a spear pierced one of them. John Eugene arrived, slicing through the remaining monsters in seconds. Madrika, impressed, asked for the name of his savior. Eugene threw his sword to kill one last goblin, sneaking up behind them, then asked if a name was truly important at such a moment. Madrika conceded the point and vowed to be a knight of justice once the ordeal ended. Later, Madrika regaled the villagers with the story of how hundreds of goblins had swarmed Murim, and how a single knight had slain them without mercy. When the crowd asked for the hero's identity, he pointed forward and shouted the name of Eugene. The people began to chant the name of their new hero. From a nearby window, Louise Paline, the mayor of Murim, watched the celebration. He noted that the more Eugene's fame grew, the harder he would be to control. Priscilla, his granddaughter, assured him that everything was under control. She expressed hope that Eugene's reputation would soar even higher, noting that the higher one climbs, the worse the fall. She then revealed that Fellid was actually a hidden illegitimate child of the Tirwin family. She explained her plan to sponsor Eugene to build a relationship with the future head of the Tirwin House. The mayor praised her foresight and decided to send Eugene another gift to further secure his loyalty. In her room that evening, Priscilla reflected that those who are thirsty will always seek water. She viewed herself as the one digging the well, waiting for the right person to drink breathlessly from it, with Eugene as the target in mind. Eugene later arrived at her office, wearing the new armor gifted by the mayor. Priscilla noted to herself that he was a terrifyingly beautiful individual, unlike any knight she had met. She began boasting that the armor was forged from Elsic iron and ogre bones, capable of withstanding a dragon's fangs. Eugene expressed his gratitude for the gear and lodgings, but stood to leave just as Priscilla prepared to make a proposal. She was shocked by his abruptness. Eugene stated he would stop by after the Tirwin dungeon was subjugated, but then paused to reflect and added that since their current contract was only for the recent byproducts, this might be a final farewell. He informed her he intended to focus on collecting mana crystals next. Priscilla screamed for him to wait, asking if he was playing dumb. She reminded him of the expensive armor, the warhorse, and the luxury accommodations they had provided. She pointed out that his sales didn't cover half the cost of the services they had provided to him, threatening to spoil his status with the people of Murim and asking if he was a shameless knight who knew no honor. Eugene smiled coldly, calling her ridiculous for dumping unwanted gifts on him and then demanding payment. He clarified that he had a contract with Bilmore and did not care what the people of Murim thought of him. He warned her that if she continued to threaten him, she would learn the true price of her actions. He accused the Palin Company of conspiring to persecute the very knight who saved the city, warning that next time, no knight would step forward to help Murim. As he walked out, Partek paused to tell Priscilla that her approach was unfortunate, as they could have had a good relationship. Panicked, Priscilla called Eugene back, offered a deep apology, and admitted she had let her desire for leverage cloud her judgment. She begged to start over, promising to keep his contract with Bilmore and add even more favorable clauses. Internally, she realized Eugene was too dangerous to toy with, yet her instincts told her she could not let him go. Eugene sat back down, agreeing to hear her out if the offer was tempting enough. After the meeting, Eugene and his mercenaries departed Murim. Murim complimented the new armor, and Partek noted that Eugene had secured an incredibly favorable contract. He explained that the Palin Trading Company's reach across the Roman Empire was vast, and their offer of unlimited mediation with all their branches was better than a noble appointment. Eugene simply replied that he had spoken out of annoyance with the entire situation. Suddenly, their path was blocked by Verthel Tirwin and a group of mercenaries, including a large man with an axe. The man mocked Eugene's appearance, questioning if he could even hold a sword, but Eugene remained calm. Kamara Tirwin then approached the group, prompting Eugene to ask if he should now address him as Lord Tirwin. Kamara explained that the situation was serious. His brother Verthel had hired new mercenaries who felt as nasty as the ones who had previously been wiped out by black wolves, implying that something was wrong. Kamara then asked Eugene to command the next dungeon subjugation party. Just then, the potato-headed mercenary mocked the appointment, suggesting he would take over if Eugene died. Eugene shrugged it off, stating that if he fell, the bald man could play commander. As they walked into the dungeon, Eugene felt a surge of excitement, having decided to play them at their own game. Inside the dungeon, Eugene moved with lethal precision, slaughtering goblins with ease. The mercenary was stunned by Eugene's presence, realizing he was doing the work of 100 men and wondering how he would ever take him down. He decided to wait for an opening to use a poison-coated sword on Eugene. Eugene eventually paused and announced they were entering an area with mid-rank monsters, telling only those confident enough to keep up to follow him. The large mercenary, seeing this as his opportunity, followed. However, Partek halted his own men from going in as well. It was dark, and Eugene thought of Sir Galfredic, noting the dungeon was less entertaining without him. He wondered how Galfredic would handle this current hassle. He paused suddenly, relieved that the mercenaries had finally decided to drop the half-hearted act. "Good," he said. Just then, Murim activated a spell that drew in all nearby water and extinguished the surrounding torches, plunging the area into total darkness. The mercenaries panicked in the shadows. Eugene used the darkness to his advantage, tearing through them with efficient strikes and sparing none of them. The large mercenary tried to spark a light with stones. As the sparks briefly illuminated the space, he felt Eugene behind him. Eugene asked if he needed fire and remarked on how inconvenient human eyes were in the dark. He then pointed to the monster he had hunted earlier and asked the man if he could now see who was the hunter and who was the prey. But it was too late. Eugene then leaned in and bit the man's neck, transforming him into a creature of the night. Eugene stood amidst the turmoil of the Tirwin manor as Kamara swiftly dashed into the room, his voice urgent as he called Eugene's name. He glared at him, asking if the news he had heard was true. Sir Verthel then entered, demanding to know the cause of the commotion. Eugene suggested they hear the truth directly from the person involved, and threw a man to the ground. The captive, Sir Maverick, began to speak, confessing that he had tried to kill Eugene under Verthel Tirwin's orders. Verthel looked visibly uncomfortable, dismissing the man as someone who had finally lost his mind. Kamara screamed at Verthel, asking how far he planned to go, but Verthel shouted back that he was the one who needed to come to his senses. He asked if he truly believed the words of a madman before bending over to Maverick, asking him to stop babbling and explain things properly. Maverick continued to rave, questioning how he could dare raise a hand against Eugene, and declaring that trash like him deserved to die. Before another word could be said, Maverick broke through a window and jumped. He fell graciously onto the upward-facing sword of a paladin statue, ending his life instantly. Verthel turned and said, "See, Kamara?" He clearly went mad after seeing a man getting torn apart like paper by a monster. "Isn't it stranger to believe his ravings?" Kamara observed that it was strange how relieved Verthel seemed by the death. Verthel then turned his glare toward Eugene, accusing him of having no pride as a knight for slandering him with absurd paranoid delusions. Eugene asked Verthel if he was truly innocent on his honor as a knight. When Verthel claimed he was, Eugene pulled out his sword and pointed it at him, demanding a trial by combat to stake both their knightly honors upon the truth. The news of the duel spread quickly through the city. As the people discussed the transgression, Eugene stood before Verthel. Kamara accepted the situation, praying that guidance be given to the winner. As the battle began, Verthel dashed at Eugene, screaming his name. Eugene remained calm as their blades collided. He found himself remembering his previous life, reflecting on how he had been chased by a mere wretch like this for over a decade. He began to fight with more seriousness, swinging his sword until he struck Verthel's blade out of his hand. As Verthel fell, Eugene told him to pick up his sword. Even those ignorant of swordsmanship could see that Eugene was overwhelmingly stronger than Verthel. Eugene struck again, sending Verthel's hand flying. Kamara dashed in, screaming for them to stop, but Eugene told him to step aside as the duel was not yet over. Kamara stood between them, declaring he could not watch his brother die, and that since Verthel was no longer capable of fighting, Eugene was the victor. Verthel, consumed by rage, screamed that he could still fight, and vowed to personally ruin that bastard. Kamara ordered him to stop, stating the match was decided, and that he should acknowledge his crimes and repent for them in prison. Verthel refused to listen, screaming that if Eugene had never appeared, he would never have suffered such humiliation. He picked up his sword and dashed at Eugene, but Eugene swung without a second thought. In an instant, Verthel's head was severed, and the space went silent. Eugene walked off, leaving Kamara to arrange the funeral of yet another family member. Early the next morning, Murim flew around Eugene, commenting on the pity of using his first familiar just to force a confession before tossing him aside. Eugene noted that Maverick had a weak mind and could not endure becoming a familiar, and leaving him would have revealed his vampire nature. He mentioned that using him as bait for a trial by combat was the most appropriate use, as he would never let someone live after they had bared their fangs at him. They arrived to find Percella and Billmore of the Palin Trading Company arguing, overhearing the mention of Galfredic's name. When Billmore noticed Jan Eugene, he welcomed him and mentioned the success of the dungeon subjugation. Jan Eugene pushed him aside, asking what had happened to Sir Galfredic. Percella explained that 2 weeks prior, Galfredic had taken part in a labyrinth subjugation in Count Evergrove's domain and had gone missing in the high-rank monster area. Jan Eugene immediately took his horse and rode toward the Evergrove manor in hopes of finding out more and saving his friend. Upon arrival, Jan Eugene was met by Jevon Evergrove, who noted that Jan Eugene was younger and more handsome than the rumors suggested. Jan Eugene offered a polite greeting, but there were more pressing issues. The scene then cut to Jevon's office. Jevon mentioned that Sir Galfredic had let his ambition get the better of him by entering the upper levels on his own initiative. Jan Eugene asked if he had truly acted alone, and Jevon confirmed it, explaining that the upper levels had been untouched for 100 years and were ruled by the master of the labyrinth. Sir Lugat's voice then entered, adding that Galfredic had been blinded by the prospect of achievement and had caused trouble for many. Jevon introduced Lugates as the house's territorial knight, and Sir Lugates continued, claiming to be the tournament champion who had previously defeated Galfredic. Jan Eugene asked if such details were important at that moment. Jevon stated that they were, pointing to how important Sir Galfredic was and apologized on behalf of Evergrove for the situation. He explained that after a month of searching, missing persons were declared dead. Galfredic had been missing for 3 weeks, leaving only 1 week of hope. Jan Eugene stated he would depart immediately, but Jevon urged him to wait 3 days while a party was prepared. He also mentioned they had hired a mage to provide support. Later, in the streets, Murim commented on Jevon's attitude and questioned the truth of their claims. Jan Eugene thought to himself that things did not add up. Galfredic had mentioned his appointment was already decided, so a further test seemed unnecessary. He knew Galfredic was not the type to act on greed or move without a competent team. Nearby, a cultist was preaching about a red shadow upon the moon and a prophecy of salvation. Murim noted the man's words were nonsense, but Jan Eugene sensed the town's atmosphere was abnormal. Someone then handed Jan Eugene a paper, and upon reading, he discovered that wild beasts were dying near the labyrinth from earthquakes. He wondered if the labyrinth had partially collapsed, and told Murim they were heading there immediately, as 3 days was too long. Suddenly, a lady passed Jan Eugene and commented that she was surprised to see a vampire in broad daylight. Jan Eugene, shocked that he had been recognized, grabbed her by the neck and ran to a corner, demanding her identity. She struggled for a moment while Murim glared, wondering why the lady seemed familiar. Murim intervened, explaining that she seemed to be a mage from the Blood Shadow School, a group that had served vampires for generations. Jan Eugene let her go, but she had already fainted. When she woke, she introduced herself as Cyranoir Ramira. She mentioned that her school's essence enabled some students to sense a vampire's presence, and that Jevon had asked her to look for him. Jan Eugene then asked for the details of Galfredic's disappearance. Cyranoir explained that she had applied for the subjugation to obtain monster byproducts. She mentioned that while advancing, the ground had collapsed. Galfredic had saved her, falling into the depths in her place. She stated that while others believed Galfredic had opened the door to the upper levels, she knew he had fallen to save her. She also mentioned seeing an enormous eye drawn on the ground in the depths. Jan Eugene noted that Jevon's story did not match hers, and decided to move carefully. Even that night, the damned worshippers gathered in the dark to offer a sacrifice. Unknown to the rest of the village, the greatest evil was already in their presence. After 3 days, the resupply was complete, and they stood outside the dungeon entrance. Sir Lugat's asked Jan Eugene if he was excited to find his friend, though he added he would prefer not to transport a corpse. Jan Eugene said that Galfredic was not the sort to die easily, causing Lugat's to burst in laughter. Just then, some Templars approached, expressing honor in fighting alongside a devout knight. Murim laughed at the irony of Templars praising a vampire, but Jan Eugene paid no attention to it, moving forward with the group. After spending some time in the dungeon, they entered the artificial space of the labyrinth. Jan Eugene noted how the space was arranged for survival, yet dangerous. Lugat's remarked it was a fitting place for evil to hide, and asked if Jan Eugene agreed. Eugene said no. Jan Eugene then asked how much further it was to the spot where Galfredic disappeared. Lugat's told him not to be impatient, and suggested that he should trust him most of all. Jan Eugene's irritation grew. Suddenly, an earthquake shook the structure. Lugat's explained that the layout was shifting, revealing shortcuts to the upper levels. He moved upward with the shifting walls, and when John Eugene asked where the shortcut was, Lugates pointed to where John Eugene stood as the walls closed around him. The space was silent, and Cyrano asked where they were. Jan Eugene then realized Galfredic had been framed. They discovered Galfredic tied to a cross, bloodied but alive. As Jan Eugene checked his pulse, Murim warned that something felt out of place. Just then the ground opened, revealing a minotaur over 100 feet tall. Cyrano screamed in terror, and Jan Eugene ordered her to protect Galfredic. He dashed at the monster, but its roar pushed everyone back. The minotaur pulled a scythe from the ground, causing the area where Galfredic lay to crumble into the depths. Almost immediately, Eugene's instinct was to save Galfredic in that split moment. But then, Cyrano stopped John Eugene from chasing after him, warning that a minotaur was a high-rank monster that could kill even a vampire. Jan Eugene told her she had overstepped her boundaries. She apologized, stating he needed to be calm to save his friend. Sir Lugates then appeared, laughing that he had underestimated Cyrano's earth magic. He admitted he had turned Galfredic into that state, and mocked Jan Eugene's desperation. Jan Eugene grabbed him by the neck, but was shocked when Lugates easily removed his hand. Jan Eugene then pulled the glove off of Lugates' hand, revealing a glowing seal. Cyrano identified it as a forbidden magic formula for inheriting the power of non-human beings. Lugates claimed they were the chosen ones, and revealed he had only defeated Galfredic by borrowing strength. Jan Eugene was mad and vowed to show him where he truly stood on the power scale, leaping forward to attack. The resulting shockwave was incredible, but Lugates stopped the punch and hit Jan Eugene in the stomach, pushing him away. Lugates then triggered the labyrinth's traps once more, telling Jan Eugene to fall to his death. In a split second, Jan Eugene stretched his sword to the closing walls, grazing Lugates' skin and breaking his sword in the process. As they descended, Jan Eugene ran toward Galfredic and carried him. He asked Cyrano if she could save him. She sighed and said she would do her best. The space was dark, with thick red water scattered everywhere. Murim reported that there was no exit around and that he could not control the water energy in the room. He revealed that in humans, he could only control their blood if the human was a corpse, but he explained that since the owner of the blood in the pool was still alive, he had no power over it. In that same moment, he spotted the eyes on the wall, realizing that it was probably linked to what Cyrano had referenced earlier. Suddenly the Minotaur rose from the water, and Jan Eugene readied himself. He told Cyrano to protect Galfredic and went on the offensive. After some attempts, he was unable to deal any fatal attack to the Minotaur. He crouched on a pillar as he found his normal sword could not scratch the beast, so he formed a blade from his own blood and dashed for yet another attack, which proved futile once more. Just then, the beast grabbed Eugene mid-air, slamming him into a wall. Cyrano yelled for Galfredic to wake up because his friend was in danger, and in that moment, the Minotaur summoned a barrage of attacks at Cyrano and Galfredic. Jan Eugene intercepted the strikes, using his body as a shield. As the attacks pierced him, he felt a familiar powerlessness he had known for over a decade. He wondered why it hurt so much more than before, as he fell to the ground. Laying there, the seconds stretched thin, paced only by the slow, heavy thrum of Eugene's heart against his ribs. Galfredic then opened his eyes and stared in shock at his friend's pitiful state. Thanks for watching. I'm really glad that we all get to experience 2026 together. Last year was really amazing for the channel, and it's all thanks to everyone who tuned in to support and watch my videos, and never for even a second do I take that for granted. You're all really awesome, and I feel blessed. See you on the next one. Bye for now.